But we begin with one of the men who'd like to replace him. And Tuesday night was Herman Cain's night at the dog track. And despite pleasant weather, the track quickly turned ugly from all the mudslinging that was going on. Here we see Mr. Cain delivering some of his first remarks on foreign policy. Not at West Point, nor the Heritage Foundation, not even the Council on Foreign Relations, but at a Texas dog track. Look closely. There he is, standing in front of the odds board, which could easily have flashed his soaring poll numbers. Back to the speech, and Cain attempted to repeat the tired criticism of President Obama for ending the war in Iraq, but it may have come across as a slap at President George W. Bush instead.
In a Cain administration, you can be assured of a few things. Before I commit our men and women in uniform, the mission will be clear. The definition of victory will be clear. And we will not get in it unless we plan to win it.
Absolutely, Mr. Cain. Then it was time for the Cain Doctrine on Iran, a manifesto full of obvious talking points that failed to offer a single solution to a complex problem.
I wouldn't sing Kumbaya. That's not working. And the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, bless her heart, waved her finger at Iran and said, "Don't you all dare go into Iraq once we leave," as if they are going to listen to us waving our finger at them.
Well, here to help us navigate the mind of Herman Cain is Professor Michael Eric Dyson, MSNBC contributor, scholar and professor of sociology at Georgetown University, as well as the author of Debating Race. Sir, after hearing Cain speak on foreign policy, do you have any idea what his policy constitutes?
No, I guess it gives new meaning to having a dog in that fight, or shuttle diplomacy, or maybe on the greyhound that was running behind him, or the horse that was in front of him, a dark horse to be sure.
Cut it. Enough.
The reality is that this is all blathering nonsense. It's a form of ritualized idiocy that is rooted in temperamental disgust with Obama and get him at all costs. It is not rooted in plain thought, rational reflection upon the forces that lie before us. And as you so poignantly pointed out, this seems to be more a remonstration against George W. Bush than it seems to be against Obama. After all, President Obama didn't start that war. It was President Bush who did. Now that they're withdrawing, you can't win for losing. If you stay there too long, my God, what are you doing there? We've gotten Osama bin Laden. That was the ostensible reason for us getting involved in Iraq in the first place, along with weapons of mass destruction. That stuff has been proved not to be there. Then get out. Well, when he gets out, now it's a problem there. So I think that part of the problem is that Mr. Cain doesn't have a consistent vision because he hasn't thought through it in a very serious fashion. And as a result, what we get are off-the-cuff statements in front of a odds board at the local racetrack.
It was quite the performance. And on the issue of Iran, does Cain remind you at all of Dick Cheney and that long roster of chicken hawks who've rabidly pushed for U.S. military action there? And do you know if Cain has suggested a clear way of going into Iran and then, of course, getting out?
I mean, this is pretty ludicrous, I think, to suggest that, yes, to really pillory Hillary for saying that, look, should we leave? We don't want Iran rushing over to its neighbor to try to create some catastrophe there. Aren't we being good citizens? Aren't we not only withdrawing, but withdrawing with a conscience? And unfortunately, Cain's foreign policy doesn't dictate a kind of negotiation that would have us acknowledge the sovereignty of someone else and to acknowledge that their government is not simply at the behest of the American government. So again, unfortunately here, this is muddled thinking and even more muddled foreign policy in its wake.
You mentioned his mockery of the Secretary of State. It seems almost incredible given that Hillary Clinton was in Libya when the air was full of lead and shells. As a woman, she's ventured into deeply conservative Islamic nations repeatedly to try and improve relationships. I mean, this struck me as not just discourteous to the Secretary of State. Doesn't it also indicate Mr. Cain's utter ignorance of the sensitivities involved in trying to broker a warm relationship with foreign countries?
That's a great point. And we can add a gender insensitivity on top of that. So that trying to attack her ignores the incredible amount of shuttle diplomacy she's actually engaged in. She didn't do this before a dogfight or a race in Texas. She did this in the midst of the teeth of the battle. She's on the front lines and the cutting edges where real consequences are there. And I think that her ability to go into these deeply and profoundly foreign territories to articulate a vision that is at least ostensibly committed to trying to negotiate peace and to broker acceptance of a more democratized form of government says a lot for who she is. And yes, it's about Cain's ignorance, and it's about his disavowal of the necessity of talking to people as opposed to bringing the big bully pulpit of the American thump our chests approach to foreign diplomacy, as opposed to trying to work it out before we drop a bomb or stick a bayonet in somebody's face.
And what did you think of him ending that section by saying, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, bless her heart?
I mean, look, if you're in church, I guess that plays well, but you're not in church. It is condescending, it's patronizing, it's dismissive, and it assumes that he is superior to her because he knows the best way. Hillary Clinton is on the front line doing what we know she's already done, which is incredibly difficult negotiations in the midst of battle. And here Mr. Cain all he's doing is throwing bombs from a Monday morning quarterback position where he's not yet been involved in the struggle. I think we know who has the bona fides here.
Absolutely. Cain's reason for being at the dog track, as you know, was a speech on foreign policy. But before he actually spoke to the Tea Party crowd, it was a man named Apostle Claver, the head of a group called Raging Elephants, who was chosen to gin up the faithful with a rendition, I think, of Fire and Brimstone that left the Greyhounds running for cover. Just watch this.
It's the Democratic Party that's the racist. The party of the Ku Klux Klan. The party of Jim Crow, the party of Bull Connor, the party of segregation, the party of the KKK. They're the racists, not us. We're their friends. We're the emancipators. We're the liberators.
I guess it's important that we make the point that Cain's campaign tells NBC News that Cain was not on stage when these remarks were being delivered and didn't hear them. What's your reaction to hearing somebody speak like that?
Well, it's pretty disturbing. First of all, I guess he had to mention the Ku Klux Klan and the KKK in case we forgot one was standing for the other. So a double dose there. So I guess it's times 6. But the reality is that this is more folly. It shows you how desperate the far right wing is, because they've got to go way back in history to talk about what happened with the Democrats, and to go way back in history to talk about the Republican Party being the defender of African American and other minority people. We know historically that was the case, because the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, and we know that black people in mass began to join the Democratic Party in the middle part of the last century because of a shift in politics and FDR's New Deal. So the reality is, let's not obfuscate and pretend that the Republican Party hasn't been the party of engaging in Richard Nixon's Southern strategy, has not been the party that has been over-incarcerating African American people with practices, along with, yes, some Democrats. We're not trying to exempt Democrats from the scrutiny about what they've done, but to really try to pit the Democrats versus Republicans in terms of what they've done about race is to really beg the question, and to go way back in history and to desperately grasp at straws for which there is no empirical proof that such a position of the contemporary Republican Party even exists.
But Herman Cain, he says he had nothing to do with what Apostle Claver said, and yet he himself has invoked race repeatedly in the past. I've got a note here that in 2005 he says congressional Democrats do not want all Americans to drink from the same retirement fountains. Right. He also says, as you know, during this campaign, that African Americans have been brainwashed. He said of Social Security, get this, deceased black men essentially fund a large percentage of the retirement income of elderly white women. I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. Yeah, and then he says the tax code is involuntary servitude. I mean, this man is getting, it seems to me, more extreme in some of the things that he says. And yet what's more disturbing about this, Professor Dyson, is this guy's poll numbers are not going down, they're going up.
They're not plummeting; they're spiraling upward, and it's really sad. And you're right. Herman Cain has not been called on the racial gerrymandering he's been engaging in, the racial shenanigans, deploying racial rhetoric, always accusing the left wing or liberals of engaging in just the kind of thing that he has become so expert at, infusing his rhetoric with profound references to race that have nothing to do with the issue at hand, and then not giving us a broad and complicated historical context within which that race should signify. So I think that he's becoming more extreme, and the more extreme he gets and the more he begins to perform this kind of lunatic fringe of the far right, he begins to curry more favor with those particular factions of the Republican Party that want to see him rise. And now he's at the top of the heap. I think it's very distressing for the Republican Party, but it should be interesting to see how that plays out as they make a choice between Romney and Perry and now Cain.
Professor Michael Dyson, as ever, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.